They're all good. We love games.
Yeah, games.
Contrary to the rumors that I hear on the internet, we
like
love
games. We like them. Have either of you ever played a game and have gone from absolutely loving it to becoming completely disappointed by it and sort of putting it down and walking away from it?
I say we go around and say each of our games first, without context, and then we can explain.
Let's piss everybody off right at the top of this video.
Yes. Ethan, go.
Destiny 2.
Destiny 2. Paul, go.
I am Setsuna and Bravely Default.
Yeah, I'll hop on the slightly controversial train. Skyrim. I have problems with Skyrim. I really do.
I don't know if there's going to be room on this table for all of these sacred cows.
No. You can cut the tension with a knife right now. I write about Skyrim a lot. I've played Skyrim on VR for us. I've played Skyrim on Switch for us. When I played it on the Switch, I was like, it's so cool that you can play this thing on the Switch, because I think that game world is gorgeous. I like walking around Skyrim. I like those mountains. I like exploring and finding those like new things. Like that's stuff that Elder Scrolls does really, really well. But as you go on from that series, particularly after Morrowind, it starts to get less and less interesting to me as a story. And I'm always a sucker for stories in games. I think Skyrim plays okay, but Morrowind had this really ambiguous story about, hey, maybe you're a reincarnation of this old general. Hey, maybe you're not. Does it even matter? What is fate? What is destiny? And it also had these interesting colonial things about the Empire expanding into this really strange world. There were giant mushrooms and wizards that lived inside those giant mushrooms. Then you start getting to Oblivion, which I do like Oblivion in spite of itself, but it's very traditional fantasy. You're back in the Empire. It's kind of Tolkien-esque. Skyrim moves from there into what I feel is pretty traditional fantasy still, even with a gorgeous game world of fight these dragons, here are all these quests. In these quests, you're going to be the most important person ever. I hate that. I want games that let me be all sorts of things. It's fine to be a hero in games. That's what games are for very often. Empowerment, escape, but also in Skyrim, you can be everything ever. You are the fulfiller of like 90 different prophecies. And fuck that shit. Like, I don't need that anymore. Like, I don't know. So I like playing that game. I played it a ton in college. It was super great to chill at night and play. But the more I look back on it in retrospect, there are things that it does, even if I think the act of playing it is okay, that I have a lot of problems.
Was there a moment when you realized this game isn't Morrowind?
The main story really does it for me. In Morrowind, it's implied that you're maybe a reincarnation of somebody, maybe it doesn't matter. There are these weird concepts in Elder Scrolls where if you walk enough like something or act enough like something, you can become that thing because you do it so hard. And then in Skyrim, the setup is okay. It's basically, there's an evil dragon god, he's going to eat the world. Maybe he wants to eat the world because that's just how the universe works. It's this big cosmological thing. And instead they boil it down to like, evil dragon, please go kill. You are strong. Here's your axe. And I don't know, I want fantasy that really grabs me and feels mystical and exciting. And Skyrim feels like a lot of those edges are sanded down. And I wanted something different, kind of, because I like that setting, but a little generic as time has gone on.
How about you, Destiny 2? Was there a specific moment where you like went from one end of the spectrum to the other, or was it just sort of like this thing that you slowly experienced throughout playing it?
So there was a day. Could have been an October day, could have been a November day. Right after the game came out, I was logging on in the morning right before work because I really wanted to finish some quest to get some engram or get some loot in the game. And what Destiny 2 does that Destiny 1 didn't do is it has a token system where instead of purchasing a lot of high-tech gear from vendors or getting it exclusively through events and completing different missions, you get a lot of it through farming for tokens and then cashing them in and getting random drops. And I think it was one of those mornings where they really streamlined Destiny 2, so a lot of the different materials you collected in the first game had specific purposes. And so you, by the end, might just have tons of stuff and you couldn't do anything with it. And in Destiny 2, they were like, well, what if you could condense and break all of that stuff down? So even if you had a bunch of extra resources in one area, you could always translate it into tokens and then get more drops. And so, as with any kind of token slot machine system, if you don't get what you want in the first couple of turns, you kind of break, and then you just cash in everything you have, and you're like, to hell with it, I'm gonna just use everything, and I'm gonna get, that one gun I really want. And I think it was during the act of kind of doing that slot machine, I realized that Destiny 2 was just completely not fun, and just, I felt so empty playing it. On the whole, I would say most people felt that Destiny 2 did a lot right compared to the first game. Especially in terms of its world building and its storytelling. And I definitely, when I first played through the story and saw all the different worlds, and I think the art direction and everything else, I was really taken in and felt like, wow, this is a really more detailed, sort of more immersive, experience than the first game, which felt sort of empty and barren by comparison.
The characters do stuff in
Right.
Destiny 2, which is great.
The characters do stuff. They interact with you, and there's this sort of the whole thing just felt a little more lively and lifelike. And then I realized that all of that was a sham and just a way to get you to spend tokens. And so just like a lot of other games like Hearthstone and other ones, I balanced because after a while you realize you're caught in this cycle, and it's no longer even fun. You just feel compelled to chase this thing.
Right, yeah, I think that's like the moment where, for me, the switch in my mind gets flipped, where it's no longer fun and worthy of my time, and then I feel like my time is being wasted.
When does it feel like a waste? When does it feel like maybe it's not as exciting?
Yeah.
There's always a moment where you either are invested or it just totally wears off.
Right.
So I'm curious, what part of Bravely Default did you not feel like you were wasting your time?
So everything up until the very end of Bravely Default. So I remember playing that game and loving it. I actually loved the game itself. I thought the systems were great. I thought like the combat was dope. The story was pretty cool. It's funny because I just very recently, like within the past, by recently I mean like the past 5 or 10 years, I started to like really embrace JRPGs because it was the one genre for me that was like the biggest hurdle that I grew up with them, like I dabbled with them here and there, but I couldn't ever get into them because I just didn't.
Was there a watershed game, the one that turned that switch for you?
Bravely Default 2, strangely enough.
Bravely Default 2 is great.
Bravely Second.
Yeah, there you go. Actually, Chrono Trigger. So I played Chrono Trigger very recently on the 3DS, but using the DS version. And that for me was like, oh, I get it now. Like, our JRPGs are dope. Like, they can actually be great. And like, that game totally stands the test of time. But with Bravely Default, at the very end of it, my girlfriend actually warned me, like, oh, at the very end, you're gonna have to do like the same dungeon like a million times, and you're gonna have to do this over and over again.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, guess I'm done with this game. And I was like, totally, it hurt, and I felt so mad about having to put it down and move on, because like, it's a matter of me learning to, or understanding that point in which I'm comfortable with saying, okay, I've gotten what I needed from this game, I can now move on. I don't necessarily need to like finish it and get that little badge on my...
It's funny you mentioned that because I had completely forgotten, we were thinking of examples prior to beginning this discussion. I was trying to think of, not only did I struggled with that game all the way through, but when I got to that point and then I'd heard everyone say like, oh yeah, you're gonna run through all these dungeons this many times, and I was like, no thank you.
I mean, a lot of games make that
I'll
mistake.
watch the YouTube clip of, I see the ending and be like, okay, well, it was really the friends we made along the way, not the conclusion.
It was a journey, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of games make that mistake where they think having a space or like a final challenge that you keep on returning to and conquering maybe more and more of is good, and it never is. Like, repetition in games can be relaxing if it's doing some races or trying to best your time on a track or something, but if you have to repeat yourself a ton to go through dungeons that you've already fought the monsters on and maybe fight like a different Cerberus monster, whatever.
And some games do a good job. I struggle to think of particular examples at the moment, but they'll take that section and it'll be extra. It'll be bonus. It'll be like, okay, so just go through the regular game, and if you still want something to do after you've completed it, you can go face these bosses you've already faced, but in a much harder order. Like, actually, Star Ocean Second Story, funnily enough, does this. There's a special post-game dungeon at the end where you go and you fight super difficult versions of earlier enemies, and it's kind of its own little roguelike beast.
I feel like earlier RPGs were very smart about having those separate areas and a lot of different side quests to look for, and somewhere along the line, maybe as we started to confuse length as a very important thing in games. A lot of things have started to get a lot of that padding that you don't like.
Yeah, it most recently happened to me again with I Am Setsuna. And I Am Setsuna, another game that I was like really digging, another JRPG, where at the very end, the last dungeon is another dungeon that we've seen over and over again. It's just a different skin of it, the different version of it. And there were no save points to be found anywhere. And I must have played for like 30 plus minutes. And I was, getting new upgrades, getting new abilities. I was changing my party out, and I just got I ran into an enemy that just one-shotted me essentially. And I was doing fine up until then. And I just lost 30 minutes of my life, just lost all of that progress. And to me, I just felt well, when a game doesn't really respect the time that I put into it, then I I hit the eject button. And I heard from a lot of people oh yeah, that's just the old school, that's the old school.
It's about finding that balance because,
Yeah.
like you said, there's a difference between a dungeon that is a different permutation of stuff you've already done and something that feels reskinned. And obviously, in most JRPGs, you're doing the same combination of buttons over and over. Bravely default, you spend most of the game, you can just grind while sitting on your couch and then blaze through all the dungeons or something. And I think similar to Destiny, it's there's this sort of formula, and if it's not being rejiggered every so many minutes or so many hours, you kind of the curtain becomes lifted, and you kind of see what's going on underneath, and you're like, oh, now I just feel it's like seeing the holodeck in Star Trek when it goes back to being a black and gold grid, and you're like, ooh, what was I was in here for how long? What was I doing?
Yeah,
Wait,
yeah.
Am I alone? There's no one else here.
I
What am I doing?
was doing my weekly patrol quest bounty to get 1 engram from Cade. Why am I doing
Right.
this again?
So has the reverse situation ever occurred where you sort of weren't feeling a game, or maybe you put it down for a while and came back to it later and actually wound up liking it?
I'm gonna stick with Elder Scrolls, and I'm gonna say Oblivion, which is, or maybe even Daggerfall. Daggerfall is massive and weird, and you have to go all around the world. It's a world that is technically the size of Britain, and you can walk across it, and it takes forever, and that seems excessive, but I think that is conceptually cool. And then Oblivion is this kind of bog standard fantasy game, but there's weird mechanics that you can mess around with. I think there's more potential to play around in that game in a way that the Elder Scrolls does really well. It's that as time has gone on, even if I don't like some of the generic aspects of it, I do like the way that it starts to play around with what sort of 3D games could do and the weird things you could do with NPCs and giving them more stuff to go around. Also, I just like when guards just swim in water at you like that.
Right.
And they're just stop! I don't know, I find it charming.
XCOM 2 for me.
Nice.
I was playing it recently, got through the tutorial, what I thought was the tutorial. It was very late at night. I was drifting in and out of sleep, and I couldn't quite tell. And so it's basically the first real mission when you've got to defuse some alien beacon or something, and then fight a bunch of dudes. And I did this maybe 10 or 12 times, and I kept dying. And I was like, this game is stupid. There's particular, I love tactics games, but I hate tactics games that, Fire Emblem does some of this, where you're forced to do everything perfectly, and it's more about solving the puzzle of can you see what the ideal way to do this is, especially when there's permadeath, so that you can come away with people surviving, or even just in this particular one, just not dying, because everyone you're using are rookies, so they don't have a whole lot of abilities, so you're kind of very constrained option-wise, and you've got to be very tactical in terms of killing people without, when you have cover and other stuff. And I was ready to just all right, well, this isn't for me. I don't know, XCOM 2 is on all of Kotaku's best of list, but F this game. And then finally, after save scumming 5 times on a particular shot, I eked my way through, and I think I survived with 2 people, and I was like, whatever, that's good enough. And then, as soon as you get back to the base after that, you start leveling people up, and you start getting, it pulls you into all these little interlocking systems, and you're like, well, I need a little bit more of this stuff so I can, upgrade this room, and I need to go over here so I can oh, this ninja person, I really want to upgrade their abilities, so I'll use them and make sure they stay alive. And all of a sudden I'm like, all right, well, I could never stop playing this game.
All the cool good
satisfied.
stuff's right after the tutorial. You just got to get through that first
Right.
hump.
So yeah, someone just honestly, they could just be like, hey, you want to just skip ahead? I'd be
Do you know how to play
Please.
tactics games? You're
Please,
you've
God.
played Front Mission, you know what
Oh
you're
right,
doing.
yeah, and that's why I was like, well, I refuse to put it down to the lowest
Yeah,
difficulty.
of course.
Which,
Yeah.
I should have just done that and then booted it back up.
Some games take a while, like they need to like simmer for a bit before you start to realize like, oh, it smells a little good. Like for me, it's in a similar vein. Not that I hated it when I first started playing it, by no means, but Into the Breach was a game where when I first started it, I was like, oh man, I don't know if I'm kind of not feeling this at the moment. But then the more I played it, the more I like just got sucked in and couldn't stop playing it. It's the kind of game where you turn it on and then like 5 hours later, you're like, oh damn, sun's down. And at some point you have to sort of be responsible and be like, I gotta go to work tomorrow. I gotta go to sleep. I'm too old for this, man. Leave a comment down below and check out Viewpoints every Tuesday.